Well, happy Sabbath. That's loud. I want to bring you greetings from the Pennsylvania Conference. Before we dive into God's Word, I just want to tell you a little bit about how God is moving in Pennsylvania. 2022 was an amazing year. We had hundreds of people that joined our Adventist churches across Pennsylvania. And I don't know the final count, it was over 364, I think, the last time that I saw. And just all of our churches getting involved in evangelism and reaching out. We kicked off 2023 with a new theme, Impact One. And we did that by wanting to help resource our churches and equip our members for impacting just one person. You see, if every person in this building studied the Bible with one other person and saw that person baptized, you would double your attendance. I counted about 30 people here this morning. Can you imagine what it would look like if you had 60 people next January? Wouldn't that be amazing? And so we kicked off Winsome Witnessing. We had about 60% of our churches join us live on the 14th as Elder Gibbs and Pottsville and Hamburg churches joined us right there in our Mission and Evangelism Center. Excited to have that facility. You know, we moved in last May, right before camp meeting. And the churches are now, I know my church is doing it every Sabbath afternoon and just helping people to learn how easy it can be to impact one. So last year I had the opportunity to study with that one person. It was a young woman named Bryn. And last Sabbath I was actually in my home church and was able to pray over Bryn before she entered the waters of baptism. I'd already begun praying, God, give me one more person. Give me that next person that I'll get to study with and see them baptized. And that Saturday night, another young person came to me and asked if I would study with them. I got the workbook on Friday, and this week we'll be starting our Bible studies and looking forward to seeing that young person baptized as well. And so God can do it. He can bring each of us that person to study with. For me right now, it's young people that are coming to me, but I'm anticipating that God can bring every single one of us a person to study with. And even if you don't feel like that, you know a whole lot on your own. You learn as you study. I remember that when my husband studied with me, we were just kids. You know, looking back, we thought we were so grown up and mature, right? But we were just kids, and I was asking him questions. He was the first Seventh-day Adventist that I had ever met. He had just graduated from Blue Mountain Academy, and his faith it was a part of who he was, but it wasn't really real to him. Do you know what I mean? And so he started studying with me, seeing how excited I was getting, and started looking at what I was getting excited about too. And on September 5th, 1981, the two of us were baptized. And on September 5th, 1982, we were married, so our baptismal date and our anniversary date are the same. God just really blessed there. But God has blessed the Pennsylvania Conference, our tithe. We ended the year up. And what we're doing with that tithe is investing it in evangelism and in pastors so that our pastors don't have as many. You know, we had a number of pastors that had 3 or 4 churches. We're breaking that up and making smaller districts, and so that pastors don't have quite the burden that they had. Our schools are growing. Blue Mountain Academy kicked off the year with 159 students. Great young people. I have had the opportunity to go in and just every month it seems that they're doing something with their staff to give their staff a break and a time to just connect with each other. And when they do that, our conference staff goes in and we hang out with the kids. And so I've had the opportunity a couple of times now to go hang with the kids. I just did that on Thursday evening after work. I went over and was in the gym supervising their recreation, and just a great group of young people, and it's the most young people that we've had at Blue Mountain Academy in more than a decade. Our other schools are thriving and doing well too. And so our attendance up is in our Adventist schools, and I'm excited about that, especially as I see what's happening in our public school systems and what they're teaching. Excited that more and more young people are coming to our Adventist schools. Providing a lot of training and opportunities and events. We just did our elders training. We had more than 143 devices looking at us the other night. This weekend we have women and family ministries training tomorrow, both on Zoom and in our conference room at our office building. We have about 40-some people that are joining us there. We have some digital media training sessions coming up on a first Sunday of the next couple of months. And we have marriage retreat coming up in February. It's a one-day, so guys, I know sometimes guys don't really want to come to a marriage retreat. I know Elder Gibbs, Gary, has told me that, he wasn't really interested in marriage, going away for a weekend. If I want to go away with my wife for a weekend, I'll go someplace fun. I assured him that I try to make those marriage retreats fun as well as spiritual. And so this past week when I went in for my departmental meeting, he told me he's coming to the marriage retreat because it's a one day this year, and so you only have to commit for one day. And so guys, if you're not really into it, you just don't have to come back again. So check that out. All of our events are at paconference.org/events. We have women's retreat coming up on April 15th. We have 3 tracks, adult, young adult, and teens, all at Hershey Lodge, all with their own speakers, all in one building, but all together. And then camp meeting. How many of you come to camp meeting at Blue Mountain Academy? Okay, a few of you. Well, this year, here it is, January the 28th, I think today is, and we already have more than 50 reservations for camp meeting, not including our pastors, because people are excited about camp meeting, June 9th through the 17th. Our first, from Friday night through Tuesday night, we have Pablo Goya, who I hadn't heard of before, but I hear that he's a powerful speaker. You can pick up his biography at the Adventist Book Center or on Amazon. I have not read it yet, but I've heard that it's just a powerful story of God working and the miracles he saw in answer to prayer. And then from Wednesday night through Saturday night, we have Doug Batchelor, who was here just a couple of years ago. And so we have a lot of people wanting to come out and hear Doug. He's a very popular speaker. And so if you're planning on coming to join us and you want lodging, I would encourage you. Go to our website, get that lodging in now, because we are going to, I believe that by March, we will no longer have any dorm rooms available. We're already running out of RV space at Grove City. We'll always have RV space down at Keystone, and we will put up as many tents as we need. And the good news is that the tents have brand new mattresses in them. So I don't know how people slept on those mattresses before, but I want to talk about prayer that changes the world. And I am just so excited to be in a church that prays, to see so many of you raising your hands and sharing prayer requests. And I'm sure that if I asked, many of you would say, yes, I believe that prayer changes things, that prayer impacts things. Well, I've had so many people in my years of ministry just, believe that prayer makes a difference, but not positive that their prayers change anything. And there is a story in the Bible. In fact, it's the story of the first time that a woman's prayer is recorded. Up to that point, you'd only heard men praying, so this is the first woman's prayer recorded. And it's a prayer of a woman, and a person that we never hear outside of this story, who changed the world through her honest prayers. And I believe that there are 7 things that we can learn from her about praying, and praying in a way that changes the world. So if you want to turn to her story, it is in 1 Samuel, and her name is Hannah. 1 Samuel chapter 1, beginning in verse 1. I'm reading from the New King James Version today. Now there was a certain man of Ramathaim-Sophon of the mountains of Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah. And I'm going to skip all the genealogy there because of a lot of words that I'm not going to pronounce well, but so the story kicks off about a man named Elkanah, and it tells us something interesting about him in verse 2. And he had 2 wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other, Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. I just want to stop right there, because I think that as, the Bible just kind of tells us things as a matter of fact, and we read it without really thinking about it. But it's really important to think about this verse, verse 2. Elkanah had 2 wives. Now, guys, some of you are sitting here with your wife. Can you imagine having 2 at the same time? I mean, just think about that, the logistics of it. 2 women. My husband is like, no way. I can never handle that. I can barely handle you sometimes. But he had 2 wives. And so why did he have 2 wives? The Bible doesn't give us the backstory, but because of the other clue that it gives us, Peninnah had children and Hannah had no children. Yet listing the wives in the opposite when it tells us he had 2 wives. It said he had 2 wives. He had Hannah and he had Peninnah. And then tells us that Peninnah had children and Hannah didn't. So from those clues, what we can learn is that Elkanah married Hannah. And we don't know how much time went by, but year after year, month after month, year after year went by, and Hannah didn't have children. And that was the most important thing that a woman could do in this day and age, in this culture. The most important responsibility of a woman was to have children, specifically sons, for her husband. Because it was really important, especially for an Israelite man, to carry on a name. I mean, names were so important to the Israelites and into this culture in general, in this time period, that there was this rule that if your husband died and he didn't have any children, his brother would marry his wife. I shared this at our office on Monday for worship, and we have a couple of young ladies that aren't married yet on our team, and I said, so you got to think about this. The brother would not marry the wife, but he would sleep with the wife to help her to have a child, and that child would then be her husband's. Did you follow that? So that his name would be carried on. It was so important to have your name carried on in history. And so the brother would marry so that his brother would be able to have an heir that would carry on his name. And so back in that, I just tease the girls in my office that aren't married yet, that when you get married, not only do you have to look at the guy that you're marrying, but in this culture, you would have had to look at the brothers too. I mean, that would be pretty weird. But you could, as a man, if your wife couldn't produce children for you, you can divorce her. This wasn't God's rule, this was man's rule. God did not make these kind of rules for people, but the culture of the time had. And so it was legal to divorce your wife if she couldn't bear you children. That's how important it was. And so year after year, month after month, came and went, and Hannah could not have any children. And we don't know how much time passed, but finally Elkanah made this decision that having a son was so important to him that he was going to take another wife. And I can't imagine what it would have done to Hannah that night when he brought Peninnah home after probably a very quiet wedding. This was the second wife. She probably didn't get the week-long celebration that most wives got. Elkanah may have been a very successful man, and so her father may have thought that, the bride price that he would get, it would be a good place for her, that Elkanah would be a fair man and treat her well. He went to church and he came up to the festivals every year, probably thought he's a good man and the money would be good for their family and she would be well provided for because, Peninnah did not have a say. Women didn't get to choose who they married at this age, in this time period. And so she would be given. And so Elkanah would take Peninnah and he brought her home and went into the room. And I can't imagine the agony that Hannah went through, knowing that there was another person in the next room with her husband. But then how harder it must have been when Peninnah became pregnant and watching Peninnah's body grow and change. And back in this day, you didn't go to the hospital to deliver your baby. The women came and helped you. And so I can imagine that Hannah needed to attend to Peninnah when she had her child. And not just one child. It says Peninnah had children. If you skip down a couple of verses, it says that every year they would go up to the feast and that Elkanah would give the offering. He would give a portion to all of Peninnah's sons and daughters. And so lots of children. She has multiple kids. Year after year, she's having children and Peninnah doesn't. I can't even imagine the pain that Hannah must have felt. And to make it worse, she lived in a culture that believed that if a woman couldn't have a child, that God had cursed her because she was a sinful, awful person. And so when she would go to market, when she would go to town, when she would go to the temple, when she would go to the feast, people would be pointing and talking about her, about how God had closed her womb, about how she must be this horrible, awful person, that God didn't bless her with a child. And to make things worse, Peninnah was a hurting woman that wanted to make Hannah's life harder. It says, that she would, verse 6, and her rival, Hannah's rival, using the word rival, meaning competitor, Peninnah, also provoked her severely, also meaning that Peninnah wasn't the other one, all the other people in the village were, but provoked her severely, to make her miserable. She wanted to hurt Hannah because the Lord had closed her womb. And so Peninnah purposely and intentionally would say things and do things to attack Hannah in this very precious place that was the most hurtful and wounded in Hannah. And why? Why would Peninnah be so mean? Well, we see in the verse just before the one that I just read in verse 4, and whenever the time came for Elkanah to make an offering, he would give portions to Peninnah, his wife, and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah, although the Lord had closed her womb. When they would go up to this festival, when they would go up to the yearly festival, the double portion was supposed to go to the oldest son. And Deuteronomy was very clear. It said, even if you have two wives and you love one and you don't love the other, you still give the double portion to the oldest son. But Elkanah didn't listen to what God had said. He would, every year at this big festival, think about it as camp meeting, coming to camp meeting, and then there's big feast and everybody's sitting around, and Elkanah would take this double portion and he would give it to Hannah in front of everybody because he loved her so much. How does that make Peninnah feel? She's the one with the oldest son. Her son deserves that double portion. And she's a woman longing to be loved. Because don't we all long for that? And yet she has a husband who loves Hannah and not her. And all she's good for is producing children. But she doesn't have her husband's love. And so Elkanah has two wives. Both of them wounded and hurting, wanting what the other person has. Hannah wanting children, Peninnah wanting love. Can you imagine what that home was like? Especially when you see that they were rivals and that Peninnah intentionally, severely provoked Hannah to make her miserable. Now, as this book of Samuel is being written, there's a little kind of like commercial break in the middle of the story. If you look at verse 3, it says, this man, Elkanah, went up from his city yearly to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. And so that's where, in his area, that's where you would go to sacrifice once a year for the annual feast. And so he would go up there to Shiloh, but notice what it says, a little commercial break about Shiloh. Also, the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests, were there. And so it tells us who the priests were. Why does it tell us that? Because this is a little bit more background to the story that we're going to need as we go through the story about